All right. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Theresa. I'm Shana Lindsey. I'm part of the Adult Education Committee, and we are here just to have a great conversation about where you both are in your journey from your time from Nassau into where you are right now. And not everybody knows who you are. So I was wondering if each of you could introduce yourselves. Rachel, you can go first, and then Theresa. And tell us a little bit about, like, obviously who you are, what your connections are to Nassau, and where you are right now, because neither of you are in Princeton, New Jersey.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Gilmore. I grew up at Nassau Church. My mom still works there. My dad retired from the seminary at the end of 2019, so very enriched within the Presbyterian community of Princeton. But I graduated in 2013 from Princeton High School and went down to Atlanta to Georgia Tech, and I got my degree from Georgia Tech in 2017, degree in chemistry, minor in biology. And then I started right after graduation at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's pharmacy school in the Doctor of Pharmacy program. So I'm in my fourth and final year, about 3 months from graduation now. So I'm actually coming to y'all from Greenville, North Carolina, which is on the eastern side of the state. And that's where I'm doing my clinical rotations this year. So mostly at the hospital system here.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So a lot going on for you right now.
A little bit.
Teresa.
Yeah. So my name is Theresa Christensen. I also grew up at Nassau with Rachel. My family moved to Princeton when I was in second grade, I guess, and we started going to Nassau then, so a while. And I graduated from Princeton High School in 2014, and I went to Penn for undergrad, and then took a gap year and did some clinical research also at Penn, and now I'm still at Penn now for medical school in my second year. And the first year and a half of medical school here is all classroom based. So I spent, especially the past year, mostly just like watching lectures on my computer during COVID. And then now for the past month, I've been at the very beginning of my clinical rotation. So in the hospital every day. And currently I'm on my surgery rotation, which has been really fun. And yeah, that's sort of where I'm at.
That's so interesting that both of you have been really drawn to the medical field in two different kinds of ways. And I'm just really curious, what has drawn you to that particular work? Such important work. Certainly, we hear all about the medical field like every day. But like, what drew you to that, or continues to draw you to the medical field?
You want to go first, or you want me to?
Sure, I can go first. I think, well, this actually like ties in really well with Nassau. I've always been really interested in service. When I was at Nassau, I was a deacon. I should have mentioned that when I was in high school. And I think I went into undergrad sort of being interested in medicine, also being really interested in English and in writing and stories. And I found myself really drawn to people's stories. And I think medicine is kind of a great way to like get to know people's stories, get to know their lives, and try to help like shape the way that those stories move forward. And also serving people, especially people who wouldn't necessarily otherwise have access to healthcare. I'm really interested in like healthcare expansion and access work. And I see medicine as sort of like a direct continuation of my efforts to be of service to others.
Wow.
So that sounds sort of self-important. I didn't mean for it to sound that way.
It didn't sound that way at all, Theresa.
Okay.
I mean, you literally said of service to others and understanding people's stories. And I think, bearing witness to how people live their lives and trying to really connect and help them in, I think medically, like really, it could be really hard, tough places is beautiful work. It's really strong, beautiful work.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be with Theresa today. Gosh, okay. So what drew me to medicine, well, in pharmacy, I had no inclinations of going into healthcare when I started college. I just really liked science in high school, had a great AP Chem teacher, had some half-baked dreams of going into forensic science, which I denied at the time was related to my choice of television shows in high school, but totally was all about the crime shows. But I do think I always had this inclination to use science to help people and solve problems. And then during college, I got really involved with a bunch of extracurriculars, but especially like new student orientation. And what I liked about it was working on really dynamic teams with a lot of different skill sets. And also for all of our incoming students and especially their families, like meeting them in this difficult transition time, like this overwhelming time period, and getting to kind of nurture them through that, inject some positivity into the process, and somehow facilitate that in a way that made it a little bit easier. And so kind of a mishmash of soul searching later, I realized that maybe there was a healthcare field where I could continue to do that type of work while using my degree in chemistry that I was already halfway to receiving. So wound up with pharmacy, which I didn't know a lot about pharmacy when I was looking into it. I have an uncle who he owns a drugstore in South Alabama. And so I knew the impact he has made on his tiny town in Lower Alabama, LA. So that was what I was envisioning at first, but have now really gone more the clinical route. So I want to work in either a hospital or like an outpatient doctor's office clinic. And I'm particularly interested in working with pediatric oncology patients and their families, because that's such a obviously overwhelming, difficult time in their lives, and whatever I can do as the medication expert to help them through that difficult treatment season and make it just that much easier, take as much burden off of them as possible, is what I would like to accomplish with my degree.
Just listening to both of you, my heart is just like filling up with hope for the future. It's really cool. So as I'm hearing both of you talk and the focus of others and caring for others and using your gifts and your skills to lighten the load in some ways during difficult times, that just makes me think a little bit about how much of yourself you probably are right now giving to other people, and certainly will continue to give to other people in nurturing and caring for them. And that makes me think, how do you care for yourself, and how do you kind of draw your strength or refill your bucket, so to speak, so that you can continue to be really present with people and their stories and care for them in really hard times? It's like, how do you fill yourself up?
It's a great question. I'm very lucky. My school has done a lot of work in recent years on focusing on like well-being and resilience skills, because more and more data is coming out of the healthcare field about the impact of not focusing on wellness in the healthcare field, and the like prevalence of burnout in healthcare workers and how that impacts our outcomes in the medical world. And so we've done a lot of work on, we call them like action plans, where you have certain things you do regularly that keep your wellness at a certain level. And then when you are overwhelmed or stressed, those additional things to reach out to recharge when you're feeling more down. But I think the things that I do regularly to fill me up, I'm really fortunate to have a strong support system in my classmates. I've really connected with a good number of my classmates in like various levels. Like we have similar interests, of course, in our career and our field, but have connected about faith, have connected on, sillier things like the TV shows we watch, the things that can just get our minds off of schoolwork. So building that support system has been really important to me. Have gotten more into, physical fitness and nutrition, taking care of my body so I can take care of other people's bodies. And then I have found a really strong church community as well in Chapel Hill. So one of the, very few upsides of the pandemic has been getting to stay connected virtually with the church in Chapel Hill, even though I'm in Greenville. So when we were in person, I was doing more work with kids. I was a Sunday school teacher for the kindergarten class at Chapel Hill, which was the best way to get my mind off of school on the weekends. And I was leading a small group of undergrad students through the Presbyterian campus ministry at the church. which was really fun. And so now I don't get to do those things, which I really miss working with the kids and youth, but I'm still in a small group that meets weekly over Zoom, and it's mainly retired age folks and me. And it's just really fun. It's like they're just all rooting for me and always want to hear about things. Like they're my pseudo like parents and grandparents here. But of course, another thing I need to do all the time is call home and, you know, FaceTime with my family on a regular basis, because they're my biggest cheerleaders.
That is really, really special. That's really special. What about you, Theresa?
So my answer is going to be honestly really similar. I think in general, like my support system in Philadelphia and my friends through my school have been incredible. We're all sort of like going through this together, living away from home, being in medical school during a pandemic. My house, especially, I have 9 roommates, so there's 10 of us in a giant house in West Philly, which has brought its own challenges of living with 10 people during a pandemic, but in general has been an incredibly positive thing for me because I get to come home to this like weird little chosen family every day. And we like make dinner together every night and like all sit down and have family meals, and it's been just a really incredible support network for me. I also, despite all the craziness, have been trying to be good about like working out and doing yoga and like doing things to make me feel physically good because, you know, otherwise if you just sit all day, I think it's really easy. Like there are days when I realize I haven't been outside in like a week. So I try to also just like go outside sometimes, see the sun, which makes shockingly a really big difference. And then like Rachel said, also like trying to stay connected with my family. I'm lucky in that I'm only an hour away from my family. But obviously with COVID and everything, it's a little bit more difficult to get home and see them. So definitely have been like having little Zoom calls and FaceTimes and stuff, which has been really nice. And also church has been a really important support for me. I go to a church here in Philadelphia that has been doing live Zoom services every week, which has actually been really nice. And that's something that I've tried to keep up with even now that I'm on clinical rotations, and have been really, really enjoying. The church that I go to here has this really incredible gospel choir, and the music has been incredible. And for me, I think music has been really, really tied to my faith. I was in choir growing up in church. I did a terrible job of talking about myself at Nassau during my intro, but I was also in the choir. And I helped teach like the preschool choir with Mrs. Ladendorf when I was in high school, which was really fun. So, and Miss Page obviously was like a huge part of my life growing up. And so music has been something really important to me. And so feeling still connected to music and to faith here in Philly has been a really great thing for me. And I'm really grateful for that, and for Nassau for bringing that into my life.
I mean, I just feel like I just want to like lift up the fact that each of you has a very organized way and purposeful, intentional way of like caring for yourselves and creating different kinds of communities. And I'm hearing that you're a part of like a school educational community, you're a part of some church communities, that you're part of friend communities, and that all of them are like really nourishing you during this interesting part of life. It's just kind of crazy. So like that, a couple of things that you all said, and Theresa, you talked a little bit about Nassau. And as I'm hearing you talk, I kind of go, wow, there's probably some connections, some golden threads that reach back into Nassau. And I'm just really curious, like, how were you participating in Nassau when you were there, kind of towards your older phase, like your middle school, high school phase? It could be younger. And how you were giving and participating in that. But like, what kinds of experiences really kind of stay with you from Nassau?
Well, like I mentioned, being in choir with Miss Page was, I think, like one of the most formative things I ever did as a person. And she really, like, I think made everyone in that choir a better singer and also a better person and a better Christian. And I'm like so unbelievably grateful to have gotten to be with her for so many years. I think other really formative parts of my Nassau experience, going to Montreat every summer was like, I could talk about how much I love Montreat until the end of days. I think, even just like the van rides down to North Carolina with all of our friends and like drawing on the outside of the vans in the church parking lot before we went down, like honk if you love Jesus on the back of the van. like silly little things like that are like memories that I will hold forever, and made me feel so connected to my friends at the church. And I think like the youth group in general was a huge part of my life, and something that I tried to share with other people in my life. Like I brought my friends from high school on a church trip one time, because I was like, well, this is another fun group of friends I have. Like, do you all want to come? Like, and I wasn't trying to convert them or like get them involved in the church in any way. I just like really loved youth group, and I also really loved my school friends. So I was like, well, they should all meet each other. Like that was my logic. And I think church always felt like a safe place that I could go and just like really be myself and be surrounded by people who understood and loved me and or at least would try to understand and love me no matter what I was going through. And I think the fact that I'm still involved in the church and in faith now, I credit completely to Nassau. I think I know so many people, like so many of my friends now, who grew up going to church with their families and now like haven't gone to church since they moved out to go to college. And I'm sure that's true also of some people who grew up in Nassau, as it's true of like everyone in the world. But I think I had such a positive experience at Nassau that it made me, like when I got to college, it felt like I missed having that. I missed going to church on Sundays. I missed having that community. And it was something that I actively sought out, and something that's been a really important part of my life since then. And so generally, that's maybe not a specific experience, but it's something I'm really grateful for.
I mean, it totally sounds like a golden thread that has run through different aspects of your life post high school, and that in many ways you have created those golden threads and cared for them. That's really cool. What about you, Rachel?
I'm like trying to think of the most eloquent way to put together all of my thoughts, and everything Theresa was saying is making me think so many things. So I also grew up in Sue Ellen Page's church choirs from age 5 up. And totally agree. It was like entirely formational, and she really instilled in all of her choristers that raising your voice, whether it's in song or in a conversation, is an act of praising God and how you can make that heard to the world. And so that's really a lesson I feel like I've carried with me. My other involvements in Nassau, I feel like I was at Nassau more than I was at my house, other than sleeping in high school. So let's see, youth group every Sunday night after choir. Sunday mornings I did church school and confirmation, and then I taught preschool, Sunday school in my later years of high school. I was also a volunteer with the middle school fellowship group, which was always entertaining. So I just feel like I was always with that community, and those summer trips as well. I think I thought about Montreat every day leading up to Montreat, starting the day we got back. Like those trips were the most impactful weeks of every single year. Like I went all 5 years I could go. That place is so special in my heart. And I am so glad that I'm in North Carolina, because now I like fall break last year before pandemic. I just picked up and like drove to Montreat for a day, and I like hiked up Lookout and ate my lunch on the top of Lookout.
I'm so jealous.
Brought my Bible and just like had a day for myself. And it was like such a good, just brought back all the memories. I visited the house we always stayed in, and I know. And I have to tell Theresa, this is an aside, but I like am slowly cleaning out my room back in Princeton. And I found all my affirmation journals when I was home over Christmas. And I like found messages from Theresa and just like thought about so many memories that we've shared and we've had with all of our like church community. And like, I think that forming those relationships has shaped me into the way I approach relationships now. Like Nassau was the first place that it was not uncool to both be a total goofball and play the craziest games I've ever played in my life, but also like be vulnerable with each other and ask these questions that would be weird to ask at school. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? Like, is there really a God? Like these tough conversations that we were having from like 6th grade on was like, now I can approach conversations with my friends, conversations with patients, even now in the medical field, where you can just dive a little bit deeper and understand how to build that trust and have that vulnerability together. And the depth of relationship that you're going to get out of that was something that Nassau absolutely taught me.
So just to be clear, you two spent a lot of time together in Montreat and in your
Yes.
Yeah.
Not the first time you're meeting.
No, this is a reunion. Hi.
So did you go to Montreat together many years, like all 4 or 5 years?
So I was a year below Rachel, so I guess there would have been 1 year that we weren't there together on like each end, right? But in the middle, because I went every year that I could go to.
Yeah, so it must have been 4, right?
Yeah, that's how math works.
I have memories of us like sobbing my last year when we
were. Oh my
leaving.
gosh, yeah. Oh, I remember that. Now
we were always very emotional in Montreat.
Yeah, Montreat is a lot of emotions, like big emotions in both directions. Yeah. The last night when you like hold all the candles around the lake and sing, that was always like so emotional for everyone.
Yeah, they call Montreat a thin place because the barrier between like the human world and God feels thinner there, and it's so true.
So true. Did you feel that when you went back too?
Yeah.
I just want to, I'm like taking in that image, the thin place. Like that's really beautiful. And so Rachel, you said like being vulnerable, like it was a place to be vulnerable and explore some really hard questions. And like some of those questions are value-based questions. Some of them I'm sure are spiritual-based questions. And I'm really curious in like the context that you currently find yourself in, the communities that you're working in, like what are you noticing about the things that those communities, your communities that you're working in right now are valuing?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I don't know if this directly answers your question, but in terms of like values, obviously with the pandemic and like working in medicine, that's been like a challenge. And I think there's a balance of like valuing public health, valuing safety, and valuing like individual well-being. And like how much should individuals be expected to give up for like the benefit of everyone. And now that people are getting vaccinated, Rachel, I don't know if you've been vaccinated yet.
First dose today.
Hey. And I got my second one on Sunday. I didn't have any side effects for those wondering. So everyone should get vaccinated, even if you do have side effects. Anyways, I think thinking about like what does it mean that Rachel and I, who are like really young, healthy people, have been vaccinated, and so many people who are really at risk have not been. And I understand that like working in healthcare, we're exposing ourselves to other people and could potentially put them at risk. And so I like understand in the grand scheme why it's important. But when I look at like my own family members who are like in their 70s and have comorbidities, thinking about like my own values of like trying to protect others and like help others that I love, that's something that like I personally have struggled with a little bit. And I'm still sort of like thinking about a lot, especially now as medical schools are starting to vaccinate like first year medical students who literally, like I said, just stare at a computer all day. And there are so many at-risk community members who haven't been vaccinated yet. I don't know if that answered your question at all. It's just something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because that is a value-based question. Like how are we valuing people? How are we valuing the equity and the access piece of it? And that is something that would be interesting to continue to explore. And like Rachel, I'm interested because you said that you're in Chapel Hill for quite a while, and now you're in another place in North Carolina, Greenville. Is that it?
Yeah, good memory.
And is there a difference for somebody who's never been to North Carolina between those two places and spaces and values in a community?
Yeah, so Chapel Hill I consider it like a Southern Princeton. Like it's all based in the university, and it's highly affluent, highly educated community. So that was what I was used to within my North Carolina bubble. And now living on the eastern side of the state, I'm still in a college town because East Carolina University is here in Greenville. But in terms of overall culture and values, I think the surrounding areas, like for example, right now I'm on a community pharmacy rotation, which means I'm at like an independent mom and pop drugstore, and that's out in Williamston, which is like 35 minutes east of Greenville, and it's way more it's just a much more rural location. And I haven't been there very long yet, but I can tell the patient population, definitely the values I would say are like family and tradition and like individual personal liberties. And the level of health literacy, which is a topic we talk about all the time in school, and I'm sure Theresa as well. I think the level of health literacy is maybe not as high as what I'd be used to in Chapel Hill and even in Greenville. And so the choice to wear a mask, the thoughts on the vaccine might look different, and it can be difficult to like navigate those conversations and get on the same page with why our values have guided us to the decisions and assumptions we're both making.
So how do you work through that? I mean, because when everybody's on the same page, those are easy, affirming conversations. And then when there's difference, neither one being right or wrong, but just a difference, how do you kind of work through that in your work? And you said specifically like health literacy. That's interesting. But when there's just these differences of knowledge, like how do you work through that difficulty?
I wish I had a really good example of like a conversation I've had where we were able to get on the same page and come out of it better for it. I haven't had those necessarily like strong individual interactions, but I think in general, when we are talking to patients that might have differences of opinion or a lower health literacy status, it's so tempting as healthcare workers to go back to the data and the science and how the studies have been conducted and what we know and why. And I think it's more important to approach it from like a human level and more of an emotional, empathetic level, because even the word data or studies, like that doesn't mean the same thing to every person. And you have to approach it from where they're at and what their values are. And if that's personal liberties, then maybe talking about, how you're impacting the other people in your community when you make a decision about just yourself. It's not actually just about you, and kind of trying to approach it not from an accusatory standpoint, but more so community, because community and hospitality and loved ones is a value that rolls deep in North Carolina and every community I've been in. And so kind of trying to tap into those values and that understanding, I think, is probably the most impactful way to approach it.
Yeah. Sounds so much about just kind of leading with love and care and empathy. So appreciate you kind of lifting that up. And kind of hearing both of you talk, there's this interesting theme around equity and access, and kind of thinking about it through an equity lens. I'm just really curious what kinds of things that you are noticing or questions that you are kind of wrestling with from an equity standpoint, or that you're interested in focusing on in your work, kind of moving forward. Because it sort of sounds like, talking with both of you, that is something that's emergent, or certainly something that you're paying very close attention to in some different kinds of ways. I just wonder how you're planning on working on it, or what you even notice.
I think it's a big question.
Big question.
Yeah, I guess I talked about it a little bit with vaccines, but I think sort of similar to Rachel, there are really big differences in the Philadelphia community in terms of like health access and health literacy. Philadelphia is the poorest of the 10 largest cities in the country, which not a lot of people know. And there are such incredible health disparities, and working at like a huge medical center in a city where so many people don't have access to any sort of healthcare and use the emergency department basically as their primary care center, is really eye-opening. Growing up, I think Princeton is sort of like a bubble in some ways, and moving to Philadelphia, really, I've learned so much about how so many people live their lives. And I've tried really hard to learn about like the structural inequities that underlie a lot of that. People don't live without access to healthcare or without access to like healthy foods by choice. And that's something I actually was talking to one of my friends today about this, because he's on a family medicine rotation. This is like a story, I guess, that illustrates this. And he had a patient who had an infection on one of her toes, and they gave her some antibiotics. And then he called her a few weeks later to ask how she was doing. And she said, "Oh, I'm doing so much worse. My pain is so much worse. My toe is turning black. I'm really worried about it," which obviously is not a good outcome. And he said, "Oh, like how was taking the antibiotics? Did those not help?" And she said, "Oh, I actually never filled that prescription." And that's something that's really, and I'm sure Rachel deals with that all the time. And it's something that's very easy to blame the patient in that situation, or be really frustrated with your patients for not following through with the care that you're advising for them. But people's lives are so much more than what you see in like the 30 minutes that you see them in the office. And there are so many reasons that she might not have filled that prescription, be it lack of understanding of why she needed it. Maybe she couldn't afford the prescription. Maybe she couldn't afford to go to the pharmacy. She would have had to travel too far. There's like infinite reasons that you can think about, that drive why people make the decisions that they do and why people do the things that they do. And that's not to say that people don't have free will and that people don't sometimes just mess up, but trying to like hold space for people's stories and for like the background behind why these things are happening has been a challenge. And also then sort of you think like, where do you go from here? Because we could have like the best drugs in the world, but if we live in a system where people don't have access to pharmacies, then what's the point? And there are times when I think like, should I have gone to law school and gone into policy or something? Like, would I be having more impact that way? Because the more I learn about like structural inequities in healthcare, the more I feel like there's so much that needs to change. And like, yes, being aware of that is really important, but I guess what I'm struggling with, what I'm thinking about now and what I'm wondering about for my own future and for the future of like healthcare in America is like, what are like the structural answers to structural problems? And I definitely don't have the answer to that yet, and I think a lot of people are thinking about that. And I don't know that anyone has the answer to that yet, but it's something I'm interested in.
The structural piece is like so challenging because I feel like I want to go into the clinical work. I don't want to be an administrator. I I am not going to law school to be a policymaker. So it's like, how do I on an individual basis do what I can, but also hope for this structural change? It's really challenging. So like from the pharmacy standpoint, there's a lot of interesting access questions on both like affordability and also just community outreach. So like I'm currently interviewing for clinical pharmacy residency programs, and like an interview question I got was like, how are you going to approach patients being discharged on insulin? Because I think insulin is the most common example of drug prices. We hear about it a lot, that they've just skyrocketed and they're so hard for our patients to afford, especially if they're uninsured. And so that's a huge role for pharmacy, is figuring out cost assistance programs for our patients and ways they can afford the medications they need to improve their outcomes. And there is some like systemic work going on there, of course, but on an individual basis, that's definitely a strong role for a pharmacist. And, in the patient population I want to work in, the drugs used in oncology are insanely expensive. Luckily, there are a lot of programs in place for affordability, but that's really going to be a role that I'm going to have to fill, is figuring out how best to help my patients afford their treatments. And then from the access standpoint, pharmacists are generally considered to be the most accessible team member on the healthcare team because of all of the community pharmacists out there. Any white coat that you see in the grocery store or CVS or Walgreens, like that is a person with a doctorate degree in medications. Like that's a medication expert that can answer your questions on your disease state or your medication. Like really, there's a lot of questions that pharmacists could be asked that most patients don't take advantage of. But there are still a lot of gaps to that. So, some pharmacies can deliver medications, which helps with folks who can't get their transportation to the pharmacy, but others can't because the workflow is just too intense. There was a recent article published in, I think, the New York Times that talked about some of our bigger retail pharmacy chains and just how overwhelmed they are with number of prescriptions, and how pharmacists approach that, and how they go, 12 hours a day without a bathroom break or a time for lunch. And so that it's really hard to get, people going into pharmacy excited about those roles, even though they can be extremely impactful into providing access to folks on that level. I could go on for all day about this. So I'm kind of rambling, but in terms of access, like pharmacy, there's so much that could be done in so many services that pharmacies can prescribe. And there are amazing examples out there of pharmacies that are offering those services, but the demand versus supply is just, there's still a huge gap there. And it's one that we just need to continue to work on fixing. And I don't think we're doing enough there yet, but I think the need is being recognized.
I just want to clarify one thing. I don't actually want to go to law school, but God bless lawyers, but like Rachel, I am interested in having a practice and working with individual patients. So I'm also, I think you said it much better than I did, working with how can I use my practice to live out those values and make a difference. And something I thought of actually, Rachel, while you were talking, is the power of the language we use when we talk to patients. For example, sort of what I was talking about with this patient who didn't pick up her prescription, the classic term we would use to write about that patient in her chart would be medical noncompliance. And I think the term noncompliance is so loaded and puts so much of I don't know if blame is the right word, but sort of blame, on the patient for their behavior. And I think just little things like that, even when we write about how patients are experiencing their symptoms, we don't say patient doesn't have chest pain. We say patient denies chest pain, which all that means is it means technically the same thing, but it puts in the back of your mind, well, they're saying they don't have chest pain, but, right. And it's what's the point of sitting with someone for 30 minutes and asking them about their life if you're not going to even necessarily believe what they're telling you? And I think there's so much superiority in all fields of healthcare of well, we have all of this education, so we know better. But I think that's really dangerous. And I think it prevents us from seeing these access issues that Rachel was talking about, because it's so easy to write people off as just non-compliant, but that doesn't capture their story.
That's so true. The medical language, like we call the primary problem that a patient presents with their chief complaint. I'm like, complaint? Like that sounds horrible. Complains of, I'm like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And one other thing I'll mention with access is I think we could be doing so much more with transitions of care. And that's a real space that's growing a lot in healthcare. And like when someone is in a hospital bed and their only like issue at hand is getting better, we have a lot more control over the situation. But as soon as they leave the hospital doors, there's a whole lot more that leaves our control. And a lot of that is like technology things that I'm just hoping we see in the next few years. Like there's no universal electronic health record system. And if there was a way that the pharmacist where that antibiotic was sent could like check up on that patient and see a little bit more about their history, understand their challenges at hand, be able to reach out to them more directly. Like I think it's a issue with lack of staffing, but it's also like if there was just a universal language amongst all of our health systems and providers, then we would just be able to do so much more. So there's just a lot of room for improvement and also some automation in there that might help us. So I think there's a lot of hope in coming years, but because we have so many challenges that we do need to be working on.
I'm hopeful in like 5 years that we can revisit this kind of conversation, because the ways in which you're helping, me as well as anybody who's listening to this understand the lenses that you are looking through in order to kind of go back to the very beginning, which is understanding people's stories, working in good service for others, like why you even decided to do this work and how you want to help lighten the load during difficult times of people's lives. Oh my gosh, the world is such a better place because y'all are in it. Like it's just fantastic. And I can't wait to hear what happens in 5 years from now. It's really, really cool. So I'm kind of trying to think all the way back. Like here you are in front of us, and full disclosure, I have a son and daughter who are very active in Nassau. Absolutely love all of the youth programs and the music aspects of things, and are really fed as spiritual growing people, and how they're developing. If you had to kind of think back to give some words of wisdom or advice you might give yourself or somebody else who is getting ready to take another step on their life journey to being more independent and really doing good work in the world, what kind of advice would you give?
This is a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is to surround yourself with people who make you better. I think something I've experienced is that in many ways we are the sum total of our relationships and of the people around us who lift us up. And by better, I don't necessarily mean the people who like support you no matter what and just like say yes, because that can be really dangerous. People who are going to challenge you, people who, like if you're going to do something and they don't think it's the right thing, are like, wait a minute. People you feel like you can have these important conversations with, like Rachel was talking about. Like I think Nassau for me was that when I was growing up. But also people who you can have fun with and like play grog with in a dark church basement. And I hope they still play grog at Nassau. If they don't, if anyone's watching this and you don't know what grog is, go ask someone. And also like, I think especially when you graduate from college or graduate from high school and go to college, there's so much pressure to, at least I felt a lot of pressure to like hang out with like the coolest people or be doing like all the right things because you're trying to everyone's new and you're trying to find your people and you feel very watched all the time. Like everyone's trying to figure out who they are and they're trying to figure out who you are. And I think there's a lot of like social pressure that's involved with like moving to a new place where you don't know anyone. And I think something I've really learned is not necessarily trying to find surround yourself with like the people who like everyone around you might say are like the right people to be hanging out with, but the people that you feel lifted up and like brighter and better after you spend time with them. Which is easier said than done and takes, there's some trial and error. But the more I've like, not that I'm like so old and wise, but like the longer I get into my education, the less free time I have. And I've realized that like I have to be choosy with the people that I like surround myself with. And there's like, I feel so uplifted and loved and challenged by the people in my life right now. And that's something I'm really grateful for and something I would hope for everyone.
You summed it all up, honestly. I think the main advice I would give is all very similar in terms of surrounding yourself with people that both love and care for you and will support you, but will also challenge you and push you to be the best version of yourself is so important. And that's both your contemporaries. And I think one of the most impactful things in my life has been finding really strong mentors to help guide me and know me and point me to the right path in a non-direct way. Otherwise, I think for folks at Nassau, I would say like try and find as you go out into the world ways to make your world more like how you feel at Nassau. And like we've spoken a lot about feeling accepted and vulnerable and just overall loved. And if you can find that elsewhere in the world, but also if you can create that for more people in the world, like the world is going to be a better place and you're going to find where you need to go. So those are my main things. And also just not doing things because you think you're supposed to. Like I think I declared my major as chemistry because I was like, yeah, I'm supposed to study something like that that's going to be like hard and yeah. At Princeton, but then I was like, oh wait, like I need to work with people. This is like my strong suit. So I found my path eventually, but like really think through what your choices are and why they are what they are, and never do something just because you think it's what you're supposed to be doing.
Sorry, I have one other thing that I thought of. My other piece of advice would be it's okay to not be okay. I think, and again, like at Nassau was a place where it was okay to not be okay, and it was okay to be vulnerable, and it was okay to talk about really difficult things, but it's not always easy to say that you're like struggling or you're not having an easy time. And like life is hard and comes at you really fast and you're not always prepared for what's going to happen next. And it's okay to like ask for help. Another thing I do to like take care of myself is I'm in therapy. And that's something I try to be like super open about and talk to everyone about because I think everyone should be in therapy and therapy is awesome and we need to normalize it. And I think if everyone knew how many of the other people in their lives were in therapy, they would feel like less, there's like this weird shame and stigma and like you have to be able to like achieve at these super high levels and also like be fine all the time. And I don't know anyone who can do that. And I think if everyone was just like a little bit more open about their own mental health and how they were dealing with it, like even spaces like this where you're saying like, how do you take care of yourself? Like that's so powerful because not everyone gets like, I can't remember the last time someone asked me that. And so this is really cool. But I think just like in general, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say like, I know this paper is due, but like, I'm really struggling right now and reach out to your professor and ask for an extension. Like your professor is also a person who was your age once and was going through the things that you're going through. And like people in general are more understanding than you think they're going to be because you're always harder on yourself than you would be to someone else. So like, think of yourself, like talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. That's the advice. That's the best advice my therapist ever gave me. So now I pass it on to you.
Preach, Theresa. This is all so good.
This has been like one of the best conversations I feel like I've had in a year. It is just so wonderful to talk to both of you. And I've had the great fortune of asking a bunch of questions and you two actually know each other pretty well. And I was wondering if you wanted to ask each other a question that I'm kind of curious about, since y'all know each other well. And you can be like, no, I'll pass, but you certainly can.
This is a very simple question, and I don't think you said it, but what do you want to do in medicine?
I didn't say. I don't entirely know. If you'd asked me 2 months ago, I would have said I want to do OBGYN. I'm really interested in reproductive rights and women's health. It's not that I don't care about men, but I really care about women quite a lot. Mark, you can cut that out if you want. And I think OBGYN is like a nice balance of like surgery, but also primary care. A lot of women use their gynecologist as their primary care provider. And also babies are really cute. But I think I like sort of really focused in on that as like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm passionate about. And now this past couple of weeks on my general surgery rotation, I've realized that like, I am happiest when I'm in the operating room, which I never would have guessed about myself. So now I'm thinking maybe surgery. I don't know. I think I'm, if nothing else, I'm realizing I need to have a more open mind to other specialties. But I think, yeah, I don't know. We should have this conversation again in 5 years and I'll tell you what I decided on. But also I would like to talk to you more often than every 5 years. So I'll keep you updated. And yeah, that was a non-answer, but.
No, but that's good. Isn't it fun how every new rotation you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah, it's like, I feel very lucky. I was feeling really stressed about it the other day. Like, oh my God, now I have no idea what I want to do. I had so much direction. And if I feel like now I have less direction than I had before. But then I realized like some people work their entire lives and don't find something that they actually are passionate about and love. And I'm like really young. And I've already found 2 things that I think I would love doing with my life. So I'm seeing that at this moment, I'm choosing to see that as a blessing.
That's a good outlook. You're going to change the world no matter what you do. So
yeah. I guess my question for you, Rachel, is in all of my very short adult life, have never been more than an hour from home. And I've traveled, but I've never lived like far away. And I still feel like very connected to like my friends from high school and like to my community in Princeton. I go back to Princeton, like in normal times, I went back to Princeton like every other weekend. And I guess like, I don't see you that much anymore. I saw you like at the last normal Christmas, right? Yeah. But what is it like growing up or like becoming an adult, like farther away? Like what has that experience been like? How have you like intentionally kept connections? I know you're still very close with like your friends from high school, because I know you, but like how do you maintain those relationships with people who are farther away from you, and with your family, and just like in general, what was the experience like of like moving farther away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even know how to verbalize it. Moving 850 miles from home when I was 18. Now, when I like say that, it sounds crazy, but when I did it, it didn't feel that crazy. So I was born in Atlanta, and moving to Atlanta felt natural to me. So I think that like took out the intimidating factor from it, and it allowed me to just like take that time to totally reset. And I think I've just been super fortunate to be around like really strong communities and people that you talked about chosen family, like that's been a huge thing for me in college. I felt like I just immediately found my people like right off the bat and built a community. And I know that was not the case for a lot of my friends going to college. And so I think I'm extremely lucky in that sense. But it also meant like learning to be okay doing things by myself, which I was always like, I wouldn't like go to the bathroom by myself at youth group, like,
like, okay, girls do not go to the bathroom alone. That's just a rule.
So I had to learn how to like, oh, if I want groceries, like I can just take myself to the grocery store and like things like that. Helped it like be a stepwise learning of independence. And at first I went home pretty often, like whenever we had time off from school, and then it's been longer and longer. And of course now is the like longest periods of time I've been away from my family with the pandemic. But it can be lonely sometimes. And when I realize how far I am from my family, it definitely hits me. But it's always been about just finding those people that become my home. And I think it's instilled in me a little bit of like, now it's a little less scary that I'm applying to programs in California and the Midwest and other places all over the country, because I know I've done that before and I can do it again, and I'll find people that are like-minded. But in terms of like maintaining relationships, I'm not always great at it. And I think it's actually strengthened the relationships that I've kept, because we have to give each other so much grace. And like, oh, we're probably going to go like months without talking, but then just looking forward to that moment that I do reunite with my friends, and like we go to Winberry's before choir rehearsal or whatever it is over Christmas break. Like you just reconnect and are able to pick up exactly where you've left off. And I think it really can show you who your truest friends are and the people that like you've really formed those deep connections with. And it's not surprising from our conversation that we've had today that a lot of those people that I have those deepest connections with are from growing up in Nassau. And the people that I was able to have like that level of relationship with as a young person. And so I don't know if I'm really articulating an answer to your question exactly, but that's been kind of my experience of being far away, is learning how to maintain those relationships in a less frequent meeting up way, but it's still connecting on like small things when we're far away and big things when we're together. And then finding those chosen families in whatever location I go to next.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Well, you two are fabulous, inspiring people, and I count myself so lucky to be part of the Adult Ed Committee and get to chat with you about your life's journey. And it just feels like the right thing to kind of close in prayer. Is that okay? All right. So I'll just offer up a prayer for both of you. God, thank you so much for blessing our time together today in this really interesting and wonderful and uplifting, inspiring conversation. Thank you for bringing two friends together again. And thank you so much for helping us all to have greater insight into some of the problems and the challenges that we are facing. And please bless Theresa and Rachel as they continue to share their gifts, listen to other people's stories, feel heard, connect with others, building community, and bless their next steps on their life's journey. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.